And at some point, you kind of get that realization that you're like, well, this is, I mean, sensible, but do I enjoy this? And yeah, I spent like a lot of time trying to make music my thing. I spent some time with comedy and that sort of thing, and it can really sort of take it out of you when you throw your whole heart and soul into something, and you get some positive results, but you always feel like you're just a bit lost as to where to put your time and effort.
Welcome to Story Power, a bi-monthly podcast where my guests and I geek out about the stories we're passionate about in all different genres, styles, and formats. My name is Lucinda Sage-Midgorden, and I started this podcast in the summer of 2020 at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. As I watched the reaction of my friends, family, and social media circle, I noticed that many people turned to stories for comfort and help in making sense of the craziness going on around them. My goal was to do the same for my listeners, but as I chatted with my guests throughout the first year, I discovered that their personal stories were the most fascinating thing about each episode. Neil Gaiman says, "Fairy tales are more than true not because they tell us that dragons exist, but because they tell us that dragons can be beaten." I now know that sharing our experiences with others helps us defeat our own dragons. It is our stories that connect us to one another. Let's see what wisdom today's guest has to share with us.
Well, before we forget, I want to say that this is episode 61, and I'm interviewing Stephen Morgan today. And Stephen, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you for the invite. It's a pleasure to be here.
And I was so interested when I saw that you are a comedian and that you're a writer and a storyteller, which is all goes right along with Story Power. So do you want to talk about all of your creative endeavors?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I can start with the storytelling actually, because that's one which I don't think you kind of get it. I don't get as much of a chance to explore and talk about. And obviously this is the Story Power podcast, but it's one which I find very interesting as someone who thinks that, there's a lot of power behind stories. Of course, that's the podcast title, but there's so much about stories and the way in which they are told and constructed, which basically speak to us on every walk of our life and can really make a difference in how we communicate with each other, how we perceive each other, and whether or not we have a positive or negative outlook on the world. And it's just one of these things which when I first started getting into live storytelling, it was something which I was just doing as almost like an extension of the stand-up comedy that I was doing. So very much looking at it in the same way as, kind of like extending anecdotes, focusing on the things that I thought were funniest about a particular situation. But it's amazing how quickly I kind of learned that it's like, well, that's not what makes an interesting story as such. That's not where, say, the honesty or the most interesting thing comes out of something which I'm talking about. One of the things which I sometimes forget is the fact that even though there are many things in my life which are very relatable to a lot of people, there are so many things which are just quite unique to me, especially living in a country that I'm not from, or having lived in multiple countries in my life and spent time doing all sorts of different things. So and growing up in Wales, so a lot of the things which I think are actually quite mundane or just how things are or have been for me can really have so much more to them when I take a step back and just tell and narrate the thing honestly,
I mean, that's why I love doing the podcast, because it seems like everyone has a very unique and interesting story. when I first started, I was talking with people about the books or the movies that they loved. But then at some point, I talked to these women who had started the Douglas, Arizona History Project, and they were talking to people who just lived in Douglas, Arizona, and wanted them to tell their stories. And a lot of those people from Douglas, it happens to be a border town. So it borders Agua Prieta in Mexico. And a lot of those people's families came from Mexico. And so they have these really interesting stories about going back and forth from the United States to Mexico to visit family, and some of the historical reasons why their family moved to Mexico. And of course, they all said, oh, I don't have anything very interesting to say. And then their stories were fascinating, so
Exactly. That's it.
That's it. And that changed my whole outlook on, story power. Oh, yeah. Okay. Everyone has a really interesting story.
Yeah, exactly. And like I heard so many different stories from other storytellers as well. And obviously there are some people who have genuinely, say, lived through some incredible experiences or things which are kind of really sort of mind-blowing to relate to on any level, or are just genuinely kind of like fantastical things from the start to finish. But I just love it when you kind of like get someone who can really capture something about a situation or a place or something that happened to them. I mean, David Sedaris comes to mind as someone who really can so well sort of summarize something and know the details that not only kind of take you to the place he's in, but also remind you who is telling the story and of what their personality is like and what really matters to them. It really speaks to their belief systems and what matters to them.
Right. Yes. So do you do the storytelling formally? Like, do you have audiences who come to listen to you telling the story, or do you do it like in little videos, or how do you do it?
Well, it's something which I think is actually a lot more popular in mainland Europe than a lot of other places that I know of. But for example, there are multiple storytelling schools in the Netherlands. There's a venue in Amsterdam called the Mesrab, which is renowned throughout the country, and it's an incredible venue. It's basically this place it's run. I'm not sure where the owners are from originally, somewhere in the Middle East. And essentially, it's a storytelling school and performance space. It's mostly it's part chairs, part rugs. And they have lots of different storytellers from all sorts of walks of life who come to tell their stories on multiple nights of the week. And this is a place which probably has a capacity of, I don't know, say something between 300 to 500 people. And it's almost always full. It's just got such a strong reputation for really doing this sort of thing well and really having it so that the people who are telling the stories are really getting that support and help to kind of like sculpt these things, that it's just a really inspirational place. And even as a comedian, sometimes performing there, you always get these like really wonderful audiences who are just so like ready to take everything in and enjoy themselves. And, I always got to come away from that place like going, I just wish I could perform here every night. This is amazing.
Yes, I bet. Because one of my former students was in the first year was one of my guests, and he loves storytelling. He's an actor, but he loves storytelling. And he said, I wish that there was a storytelling school, because he remembers he was at some sort of a camp, or maybe it was at school. A Native American storyteller came, and he was just so fascinated with that. And he said, I want to do that. But in the United States, I'm not sure there are any storytelling schools that he could go to. So,
maybe in the big cities, I guess, because the Moth and, there are some places. But I can relate to that, because I mean, it was never a thing in the UK, definitely not at all. And in Australia, actually, that's where I started doing the live storytelling. But it was one fanatical guy who was throwing his whole life into it to try and make a thing of it, and it was, to me, I was kind of I find it fascinating because the very first booking I had through the guy, booking, it sounds so cold, but the first time this guy sort of like, he asked me to perform, I'm so used to comedy just being like, you get the booking and then it's like, okay, be here this time, and that's the last you hear from them until the day you turn up. But this guy was kind of like, okay, so this is the date the show is going to be, so we'll have our first conversation on this date, and we'll just go through what, and I was just like thinking, like, what first conversation, what about, what the hell are we going to talk about? Are you going to tell me your story? Am I going to tell one of yours? What's happening here? And I was really super skeptical because I was like, I don't know who you are. I don't know what it is you're about. And we had this first conversation, and I have to admit, it was incredibly awkward, because if you're just telling a story in the manner that you're going to perform it to a large audience, to one person, it feels so like unnatural. And so I start trying to tell him this, but in a way where I can't look him in the eye, because it just reminds me that there's one person who's listening to all of this. And it was a really nice session because he gave me a lot of gentle feedback. He didn't have much to criticize, but he did have a lot of little pointers that were like, look, this part I particularly liked and enjoyed, and and this thought, and giving me little like seeds of thought that I could then kind of take away from it. And then we had like another conversation later, and then we did the performance itself, and it was really good. But the funny thing is that like I performed for the guy a few other times as well, and ended up doing like one of his best of shows. And it was just like one of these things where I kind of like realized that I never spent the time really thinking about the craft of it all, and had never really given it the attention that it deserved, which seemed crazy to me because, I like doing lots of writing. And of course, writing and storytelling have a lot in common. It's just that you've got the added element of the delivery as well.
Yes. Oh my gosh, that's so great. So where was that in Australia?
I was in Brisbane. I lived there for 4 years. It's the biggest city in Queensland. It's one of the top 5 in the country, but it's a hot city, and it was a nice place to live. But it was a bit too far from my friends and family growing up.
Oh, yes. Yeah. My husband and I took a trip circumnavigating the globe, and the Netherlands, England, and Australia were parts of the trip. So that was in 1996, a long time ago. Yeah, we were in The Hague, and we took a trip to Amsterdam to see the Van Gogh Museum. My husband's a visual artist, graphic artist. Artist. So that was so fabulous. But absolutely, yeah. So I was just wondering, I was interviewed by a woman last week or earlier this week who's from Brisbane. So that's why I was asking. Right. Yeah. That's a small world moment. I actually met someone here in the Netherlands as well, who's become quite a close friend of mine, who just coincidentally happened to be from Brisbane, and this was when I was living in Nijmegen, which is kind of like a smaller city and not very well known in the Netherlands. And it was one of those really weird moments as well, because I was like a new expat to the city, and I just went along to like a meetup because it's just like a way of getting to be settled, meet other people. You get a lot of expats there, and for no apparent reason, we were the only ones who turned up to this thing. And so it's just me and this one other guy, complete stranger. And like, very quickly, he's kind of like, oh yeah, I'm originally from Australia. And I'm like, oh yeah, whereabouts? Thinking, I do know Australia. He's like, Queensland. I'm like, oh, we're in Queensland, Brisbane. I'm like, oh my God, you're kidding me. I moved from there 2 months ago. This complete opposite side of the planet. And the weirdest thing of this whole thing is we had a mutual friend. Like we knew someone who like instantly, but like by the end, like we got on like a house on fire, but like a few hours later, we like took a selfie together, sent it to the guy, and he's just like, what the hell is going on right now? Definitely. It was a real small world moment. It is. It can be. Yes, it can be.
Yeah.
We have a friend, a college friend who lives in Adelaide. So that's far away from Brisbane, but yeah,
That's the thing with
that's why
Australia,
we
though.
went to
Everything is far away
Australia.
from each other.
I know, really.
That's why you went there. Yeah.
Yeah, sort of like the United States. Everything. Oh, we're flying into New York. Oh, we're going to go to California in a couple of days. Well, you can if you fly, but
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Oh, it's crazy, the distances.
yes, really. So, well, and do you have I have writer friends who say, I have a job on the side. I'm a writer. That's my job. But my job on the side is working at Walmart or someplace else, So do you have a job on the side besides your?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the dream is to be able to focus on like more creative outlets full time. But I work in IT. That's kind of that's the only thing which kind of makes money. And that was like my background. Like when growing up, both my brothers we've had computers in our house like all my life, and it was just one of those things that like my brother's oldest brother was like really into programming and like really sort of the really technical stuff from a really young age. He just like took to it like a fish to water. And that was really sort of like, interesting because like as a kid, that's all I knew. And this was before it was so common for computers to just be part of everyone's life. But it was, for him, it was a passion. For me, it was kind of like they've always been there, So to me, a lot of this stuff was just like vicariously coming into my like world. And I ended up going into education down that track because I was also a very sort of timid kid who was just kind of like, I just don't know what to do. But I guess if I do this, then if I get stuck, I can ask my brothers. That'll help. That'll help. And at some point, you kind of get that realization that you're like, well, this is, sensible, but do I enjoy this? And yeah, I spent like a lot of time trying to make music my thing. I spent some time with comedy and that sort of thing. And it can really sort of take it out of you when you throw your whole heart and soul into something and, you get some positive results, but you always feel like, you're just a bit lost as to where to put your time and effort. And I have to say, at this point now, I get bookings for comedy things. I put things on myself. I make little sketches. I do all sorts of things here and there, but on my own schedule. Often I do overcommit, but it's kind of so much more liberating to get to that point where I feel like I do the things I want to do, and I can say no, and I can also take a break for a while, and that sort of thing. And I think it's a much healthier way to live.
Yes, really. I understand that. I used to teach high school, and I just got to the point where I couldn't really do it anymore, even though I'd only done it for 10 years. And I say that I didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up until I was 53 years old or 54, something like that, which is when I realized that I wanted to be a writer, which has evolved into blogging and this podcast. So part of the reason was I had to get up at 4:00 in the morning and leave at 6 and be there at 7, and school started at 7:20 and ended at 1:50. And then usually I was directing a play, so I would be there till 4 or 4:30 and get home. And then it was, I had to go to bed at 8:00 to get up in the morning. Yeah. And it was hard. I was driving 92 miles a day, and it was really just difficult. And, I was getting older and tired. And finally, when I quit, even though it wasn't so financially great, and I started teaching at the college, I was so much happier because I had plenty of time to write. I had plenty of time to work on my teaching that I loved because I got to teach theater again. I had to teach English for a while, which is not... that was fun. It was okay, but that's not my education. My education is in theater. So it's, but I just kept plugging away at, oh, well, okay, this thing can expand into this thing and this thing can expand into that thing. And I think that's kind of how life is maybe anyway for most people, if they're open to it.
That's it. I think, and that is something which like I kind of also had to come to the realization of as well, because there are like, well, being in the arts a lot, there are a lot of people around me who friends of mine who I see what they go through and have to kind of like work out like on a day by day basis. A lot of them have made the jump to kind of like go into something for themselves, go into a lot of these things full time. And I kind of like see it and see how hard they kind of like throw everything into it. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm not, even though I do things like comedy, it's like at my core, I am quite an anxious person. And I'm definitely not one of those people who can like handle that level of uncertainty and stress very well on a long-term basis. Like, for example, we recently moved into a new home right now. And I always think it seems so pathetic on the standards of like problems you can have in life. But right now we've got like some things, like it's just some of the rooms are unpacked and that we've got furniture and stuff, but there's so much stuff that's just messy and there's so many things that we need to get done. And there's a part of me that's kind of like, oh my God, I can't relax here because every time I look, I just see the things that need to do. And then every time I relax, I feel guilty because I'm like, why aren't I doing that thing? And if I had that as my like constant thing of constantly feeling guilty, why aren't I doing more? It's me who's responsible for all of this. I think I would just burn out.
Oh, yes. My husband's a little bit like that. He comes by it naturally. His father's like that too. If he's sitting down and playing a game on his phone, oh, I'm just so lazy. And it's like, I read this article that said you need to have that downtime. You need to daydream. You need to, if you're going to be productive, you've got to have time when you're not doing anything. And so I always say to him, you need to do that. You need to rest.
Yeah, and that is actually something which I find harder than ever to do as well. Because one thing that, because I had a late diagnosis of ADHD as an adult. So it was something which kind of started to make a lot of sense of things that had happened earlier in my life, but like I never recognized it at the time. And one of the things which I kind of struggle with like the constantly connected world, so it's mostly through smartphones and everything being available all of the time. And, like most people, when I'm doing nothing, so to speak, nothing in inverted commas, I'm kind of scrolling through my phone or I'm like browsing the internet, I'm doing something low key that actually isn't nothing. And it's one of the things that I've kind of realized through this, and it's a weird sort of state. It's almost meditative, but I've kind of found this through not maybe the most natural of scenarios, but like I love watching live music or seeing a band perform. And I kind of get this hypnotic effect where my brain can wander because I'm kind of stimulated to a low-key effect because something is in front of me and it's happening, but they are still just playing songs, and they're songs I'm familiar with. So it's not like there's like, a constant surprise every second. You just really can be in the moment. And I realized it's like the thinking and the way that my brain kind of acts in those moments where it's engaged enough that it's like got something that's stimulating it slightly, but it's not so engaged that it's just kind of like getting all of its endorphins and like, its positive response on something else, that suddenly it just kind of comes alive with like all these creativity and like thoughts. And I start thinking about things and I go like, damn, yeah, I should do something about that. I haven't done that. And it's something which I recognized was like, yeah, like I said, it's almost like a meditative state. But I was finding it through this and realized that was one of the reasons I loved live music so much. But I find it so hard to recreate in any other scenario. The funny thing is the only other place where I kind of get this is if I'm at work doing my day job, and I'm in a meeting I find really boring, but obviously you can't start yawning and closing your eyes.
Right.
Then I have to kind of have an interested face. So I'm kind of like, my brain is engaged enough to do the whole kind of like, yeah, oh yeah, right, go. But my brain is able to kind of like go, hey, what happened to that idea you had for that? If you started doing sketch comedy like that, and what equipment would you need to kind of like get it all sorted out? And who was that guy who said had that idea that was going to work with you? So my face is, there in the meeting going, yeah, right, really interesting. And I'm in my head kind of like going, yeah, this is it. I'm going to contact that guy. We're going to make this happen. It's going to be amazing. And, things are going to just change now. I just wish I could find a way to just sort of be able to say, okay, meditative state, go. It just does not work.
Well, when I meditate, I use music. I have music that I listen to, and then I just close my eyes and then I just let my mind wander or whatever, focus on something maybe.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's I can do it. I love the quiet. And that was one thing my mother-in-law asked, do you listen to music or do you listen? At that time, they didn't have podcasts. They weren't, they had them probably, but they weren't as popular as they are now. But she was asking me on my drives, do I listen to music or something? And I said, no, I'm just quiet for an hour, hour there, hour home. And that was when I would get my best ideas because I would be thinking about the lesson for the day. And in fact, that's how I came to the realization that I wanted to be a writer. We were going to be reading something from Walden by Thoreau that day. And I was thinking about it. And something about the San Pedro River, which we live close to the San Pedro River. It flows from Mexico up north into the United States. And I was approaching the San Pedro River and I heard this little voice in my head that said, you need to be a writer and you need to be a writer like Thoreau. And it was like, what? What are you talking about? And so, of course, more little ideas came to me later. And I did try to write a memoir, but it was bad. So I ended up writing a novel eventually and self-published it. And I'm working on the second one now. But now it's funny, all these years later, 14 years later, an idea for a memoir has come to me again. So
wow.
Who knows how it goes?
That's it. I know, to be open for those things when they happen like that. That's a great position to be in, right? Because you've got to be open to the change. Because one of the things that I really struggle with sometimes is letting go of something when a better thing comes up. I'm not recognizing it because there's a part of me that just can't say, I've spent this many hours on this, but it's not doing anything for me and it's just taking my energy. I do struggle to kind of say, stop, move on, do the other thing, find the thing that actually makes you happy.
I think that is a common experience for people because, I have this dream and then the dream could evolve, but they're not letting it evolve.
Yeah.
So that's it. Yeah.
And also like sometimes as well, because I particularly with songwriting, things like this. And actually I think the difficulty is that a lot of like ideas, and I guess this would also, I'm guessing this would apply to writing a book, but obviously I've never done it. Actually, I would think it'd almost be harder with writing a book, but you go through all of the different phases of, kind of like the birth of the idea where you get a bit of the excitement. Then, every time you come up with something which you think is like really pivotal or exciting that could come from that, in those early phases, it's like, it is like effervescent. You can't wait to kind of get stuck into this idea, and the possibilities are all just like your imagination just goes wild with all the things you can do. But the difficulty comes when it's like, okay, so you get to that point, you start exploring the different things, and then you get, say, I don't know, like 80% of the way through. And that is the point where it's like, okay, look, I've got like the structure, I've got the ideas, I've got the things that I want to do. The things that are remaining now are going to be the hardest, the things which are just going to take a lot of repetition, and you're going to notice so little of an improvement for so much effort to get these last bits done now. But they are also the most important bits, because these are the bits which can really make or break everything. Because if you start to cut corners and say, for example, so for me musically, it's like if I hear a song and it just has this like perfect sound or perfect moment, or even like when someone's singing, it's like takes that breath in that right point and it's just so well executed, that can become the thing which kind of like puts it from like good to great for me. And you know that these are all the things that come from that last, the final sprint. And so it's just really hard to know which ones are the ideas where it's like, this was a bad idea. I am like, flogging a dead horse. I need to give it up. And which ones are the ones where I need to say, come on, Steve, just do it. Just like get your head in the game. You're so close to the end and you need to take this seriously. And then when you get it done, you kind of like go, hey, it was good after all.
Yes, right.
It takes a lot of, like self-learning and really kind of understanding the difference between it. I say that, I always get it wrong still.
Well, and you have to wake up every morning and say, I'm going to go work on this thing.
Yes.
For me, I don't know why, but the creation part is the hard part for me. Once I get most of because I saw this movie once called The Magic of Belle Isle, where Morgan Freeman plays a writer, and he was in a car accident, so he's in a wheelchair. And he's been in a wheelchair for years and years. But then that's when he started writing, because he was a professional, I think he was a professional baseball player. And then he was in this. And so he had to find a new career. Well, this girl that's next door to him finds out he's a writer, and she wants to be a writer too. And she keeps asking him to help her. And he's in a bad way emotionally. So finally, one day he gives in and he says, okay, look down that street. Tell me what's not there. And she's like, what are you talking about? She doesn't get it at first. And he keeps saying, tell me what's not there. When she says, I want you to teach me to be. Finally, one day, she looks out at the beach on the lake and she says, there's a man walking down the beach. And he's doing blah, blah, blah. And he goes, yeah. And what? And what? And then, so that's the part that's hard for me, is seeing what's not there and putting it all together into a story. Once I have the story, because I'm really good at the whole plot outline thing, then I can arrange it. And that's the most enjoyable part for me. But yeah, for some people, they love, their imagination just goes, and because I've talked to other writers, and but that's not the thing for me. I don't know why I have.
But it's funny actually, because like that. So when I hear you say that, I'm kind of like, if we were, I don't know, doing musical comedy something, I'd be like, hey, we would probably work well together, because that's kind of like, you need to have people around you who have that different sort of way of working. Because I do, and I teach and perform and do a lot of improv, and it kind of it fits well with who I am. Like for me, improv is a joy, and it's something which comes naturally to me, and I kind of and I enjoy it, and I get a lot of benefit out of it, but it also sort of fits with my personality too. Whereas I find that so that's why I'm good at kind of like being in the moment, and I'm kind of like bouncing off with someone else to come up with things, it's great. But then to actually then sort of like transform that into something solid, like that you kind of like really dissect it and analyze it and work out what was really good there and what could become something else. That part, I kind of, I need like a person who I'm, working with, who can help me work those things out. And so, and I can also see it in other people when I'm kind of trying to do anything creative with them. I can see if we're like people who can work well together, or people who are just going to end up sort of both, being good at the same bits and then getting to the same point and like going, okay, do you want to do the rest of it? Oh, I thought you'd be interested in that. Oh, okay. Well, let's see how it goes. Yeah, doesn't work so well.
Yes, right. I think that's one joy of collaboration, is finding the people who fit every little aspect of the team that needs to be done. Yeah. And when you have, I mean, I've worked on productions where, the team didn't mesh very well, and then the production doesn't turn out very well.
Yeah, it makes a huge difference. And it's a very hard thing to get right as well, especially when there's more than two people, because the dynamic changes so much every time you introduce another person. It's almost it's like there's a permutation every time there's another person. It's like, how does that person work with them, and how does that person working with them affect the other one? It just quickly becomes very complicated. And and I think that self-reflection is really important in this sort of thing. And again, as you mentioned, the whole kind of like what is not there. A lot of the time, it's not about knowing what your strengths are. It's about knowing what you don't have the ability to do, what is not there in your own kind of like skill set or something like that. Because because the thing is, if someone is like really good at the same thing as you and the other things, then they're going to be great to collaborate with no matter what. But if they don't have those things which you lack, then it's just never going to happen, and it's just always going to face the same problems.
Yeah, it is. It's more difficult that way. Yeah, I hadn't thought of that before, but yes, you're right. Yeah.
I mean, it's this is the difference as well. It's like I say these things, but putting them into practice, that's a whole different thing. I'm still very much more of a kind of just get caught up in the moment. And then, it's like, if I feel like someone else is having a good time and I'm having a good time, it's kind of like, yeah, okay, this is amazing. We should keep doing this.
Right. Yes. Well, and it takes, I think sometimes it takes discernment to realize what someone else's strengths and weaknesses are when you're going to work with them. If you've never met them before, you can't, there's no way you can know that really, but
there's a lot to be said as well with like just trusting your instincts too, because, like if you heard the quote, I don't know how real or where it comes from, but it's one of those ones that sticks in my head that like, in a job interview, the people interviewing you will have made their mind up on you within like the first 10 seconds of the interview. And it's amazing how like quickly your subconscious can kind of pick up on different cues, whether it's kind of like insecurity or confidence or arrogance or things like this. Just without your like conscious brain even knowing why it is. So for example, like this conversation right now, I've done a lot of interviews in my time, and I have to say, I'm really enjoying this. And we've never talked with each other before, but I also find you're a person to engage with, and it's a really natural thing. That doesn't always happen. There's a lot of times where I can be like, okay, this is actually quite hard work. And it's not that the other person is doing anything wrong, or I feel like I'm doing anything wrong. It's just that fundamental moment where it's like, we don't like mesh, and so much of it is, it's beyond my conscious brain. That part just knows that it's like, hey, this is good. Let's enjoy it.
Or, oh dear, how am I going to get out of this?
Yeah, exactly. It's one of the two. And either way, it's not in control. It's just reacting.
Right. Yes, really. So were you born in Wales? I'm going to ask you about your background. Were you born in Wales? Sure.
Yeah, I was born in Wales. My family's Welsh. I grew up there, until going to university, basically, my whole time growing up in a town in South Wales. What was the name of it? The town was called Bridgend. It's not a nice place, and it's not well known. Like Cardiff is the capital of Wales. Right. Swansea is the second biggest city, and it's halfway in between the two. Oh. And it's not So just like a quick sort of thing on South Wales is that Wales was very heavily dependent on coal mining. It like huge numbers of valleys and villages and towns were based around coal mining and the steel industry in the south. So a lot of that kind of industry. And as we know, that's not the case anymore. In the 80s, it was very quickly sort of gutted as an industry in the UK. And as a result, you've got like a lot of these villages where there isn't really any work and there's not really anything that's been done sustainably to kind of to keep it going. My wife is Portuguese, and when she first visited, she found it fascinating that you'd be like in the middle of what felt like nowhere in all of this countryside and hills, and then you'd end up with this like village where all the houses are just so crammed in together, and they're all so small, and it's kind of like you've got all this space around you, but everything has just been thrown together so close. And that's because the whole reason this existed in the first place was because of a coal mine, and now the coal mine is gone, and now it's kind of like, why are these houses so small in the middle of nowhere, and why is it this way? But yeah, it really had a negative impact on like the country in a way that sort of it's found some sort of new identities since, but not really to the same extent of like the I guess the affluence and like the jobs and the everything that it brought with it as a society. I mean, like Welsh mining was actually something which was almost an identity. So Bridgend, where I'm from, is the sort of place which the town itself, it's not a nice place to visit. It's not a nice place. And I have no desire to go back and live there. My parents still live there, and I've got like a lot of family in the area, but it's kind of sad to see that it's just been getting worse and worse and worse. And even though it's surrounded by like some of the most beautiful countryside coastlines and things like this, it's that kind of, that's all well and good, but it doesn't make for a nice place to live. It has problems, and those problems, I don't see what the long-term solutions are. So I'm happy to be out of there, and I'm happy to visit. But yeah, unfortunately, I could never really see myself living in Wales again.
Yes. Well, Sage is a British Isles name. My father's family came from there, so I haven't investigated all the roots yet, but I do know that it's someplace from the British Isles. So
fair enough.
Yes. Well, the Netherlands is a wonderful place. I loved it. Do you enjoy living there?
Absolutely. I really didn't know what to make of it beforehand. Like a lot of people, I sort of kind of ignorantly, especially considering how close it is to the UK, I was kind of like, well, I know Amsterdam, and I know that war criminals go to The Hague, and that's about it. That's pretty much all I knew about the country. And when what first made me move here was my ex. She got a job here. She was a scientist. That's also why we went to Brisbane. And even though that relationship ended, I kind of had this realization that I was like, I have a really good life here. I like this country a lot. And yeah, I have no, if it was the only downside, I'd say, is the weather. But I'm British, so it's not really that much different. But it's such and one of the things which I think it's just so hard to really say how wonderful it is unless you experience it, is having this culture where cycling is just such a standard way and just getting to place, which means that every single day you get outside, you do like a little bit of exercise. So for example, today I think I would have cycled like 10 kilometers total, like over the course of different little bits over the course of the day. But it's like for example, I noticed that I find it a lot easier to stay not fit, but just like that low level of just like keeping healthy. I get vitamin D because I'm outside so much. I can, in Nijmegen, when I lived in the southeast of the country, I lived like a few kilometers outside of the city. far enough away that, if I were to go see a friend in another part of the city, I'd probably would have to drive or catch a bus or something like that. But I would be like, hop on my bike. 7 minutes later, I'm at the door. And then we're like, hey, let's go see that other friend. Off we go, all on our bikes. It's all flat, everything is just so convenient for it. It's so safe because all the bike lanes are completely separate from the cars, and bikes get right of way over cars. And it's, it's one of those things which it all sounds very like, okay, I mean, that's fine. That could be nice. But when you live this life every day, day in, day out, and you kind of realize that like all of these benefits of being outside, of the accessibility and things like that, you just realize it's like, I'm generally happier. I can't quite say why, but you know what? Everything is easier and more pleasant.
Oh, you found your place.
Yeah, basically, yeah.
That's great.
It's so nice.
Yeah. One of the things I was impressed about the Netherlands was, everybody wanted to speak English with us. It was like, they were so excited. Oh, good. We get to practice our English when, we didn't know Dutch, but we wanted to, at least learn a few words so that we could.
Right.
Oh, no, they wanted to talk to us.
I mean, as far as living in a country where you don't speak the first language, this is the easy mode, basically. It's incredible. The number of times that people have told me they don't speak very good English and then speak like this, like absolutely near flawless version of the language. There might be, say, some expression or something that they don't understand, and then suddenly they just get very self-conscious. But it's like, no, honestly, you know what? Like, even different parts of the UK, people don't understand each other's expressions. And
That's right.
And in America and English, it's like, there might be something I don't understand, but I kind of like go, I think I get what you mean by this from the tone and context.
Yes,
so it's incredible. Right. I mean, even today, actually, because I've started to pick up a bit of Dutch, but not fluent by any means. Even today, I had like one of my colleagues at work who I hadn't met before was speaking to me in Dutch, and I'm good at understanding it now. And so I kind of responded in English. And then she said, in Dutch, she said, would you like English or Dutch? And I was like, English, I asked. And then she asked the exact same question again, despite the fact that I'd been responding to it all, now in English, and then was like, wait, we've already done this. And I'm like, I get it. It's okay. But it's like, it's this weird thing now where I'm kind of like, someone will speak to me in Dutch and I'll respond in English, and it just messes with their head because they're like, but you understood me, but you talked English. So which language are we talking now? And I'm like, well, I'm speaking English, but you can speak Dutch if you like.
Because I understand you, but I don't speak it. But yeah,
exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. I love that.
Yeah, I mean, you're around it so much, you kind of pick up on different things, you try to learn, but to actually speak is, again, it comes back to the anxiety and like timidness, and I'm kind of like, because so many times I'll sort of say something badly in Dutch, and the person will be like, "Oh, pardon," and I'll be like, English, please. I'll just panic, I'm like, I make no sense, that I don't want to waste this person's time.
Right. Well, I mean, we've lived in Arizona for 25 years or 26 years, and I still don't speak Spanish. And I taught at a school where it was like 65 or 70% people who didn't speak English as their first language. They spoke Spanish as their first language. And I'm just so lazy. I did start to learn it, but I don't have anybody.
It's hard when you haven't got that not motivation. It's hard when you haven't got that sort of, I cannot get by without it. That's when people really learn a language, right? It's when you're somewhere and it's like, I have no choice.
Yes, I have to learn it. Right. Yes, exactly. Yeah. Right now, what?
So my wife is Portuguese as well, and we recently got married. Actually, it was only a week ago or so. Thank you. And like now, I'm also trying to learn bits of Portuguese as well, because even though my wife is completely fluent in English, like to a ridiculous level, it's like, obviously I want to learn, but like, because I grew up being completely like unilingual, I only knew English. It's almost like as if I never had that part of my brain that sort of really understood that things could be thought of in this different language way. So I do try, I am trying to learn it all, but it's amazing now that I'm trying to get Dutch and Portuguese going, that my brain will often just sort of like go, oh, it's time to speak Dutch or it's time to speak Portuguese. It goes, hey, it's foreign time. And so I start saying Portuguese phrases to Dutch people, and I start saying Dutch things to Portuguese people. And then sometimes I even throw Spanish in there, which I don't even speak. But sometimes there'll just be like a sudden moment of Spanish because I'm just like, and I'm like, where did that come from? I don't even know Spanish. But now I've just responded with like, just something completely out of nowhere, like Donde esta? Why am I saying this? And it's just so embarrassing, though, because, obviously it's like, it does not come across well to just be like, hey, you're not from where I'm from. I'm going to speak in some foreign language and we'll see what happens.
Well, you're just creating those new neural pathways in your brain. You're still doing that.
Exactly. That's it. I mean, that's what's happening. But I guess I think that, like the advice I keep getting from people is like, just speak, make the mistakes. People will be fine. They'll understand.
Yes.
But I'm like, you don't know me. You don't know quite how embarrassed I can get at things which really shouldn't be embarrassing at all.
Well, if I see, this is a little bit different, but if I see a former student, and I know they're a former student of mine, but I can't remember their name, I just say, yeah, oh, hi, how are you? And then I say, I know you're my former student, but I don't remember your name. Can you please remind me?
But that's good, though. I absolute respect to you for that, because that is what I wish I would do. But in those sorts of scenarios, what I end up doing is kind of like going, hey, you, oh my God, how's things? Or like if it's, mate or like, pal, friend, there's all sorts of ways but like, I will leave it way too long before I reach that point where I go, I don't know their name. I don't have any way of finding out their name at this point. And it's getting more and more awkward. I need to just get out of this situation. It's too late. Run away.
I know. Yeah. Oh, well, I used to panic about it, but I've been teaching so long now.
I guess being a teacher, I was going to say, being a teacher, I can imagine you.
Yeah. Really I have a lot. Right. I have a lot of former students. So
yeah, exactly.
I can't possibly remember all their names. Well, this has been so much fun. Do you have anything else you want to say before we go?
Just that I'll share my links with you or whatever. And,
yes.
And you can, if there's anything, you can find out more about the stuff that I'm doing online, performances and things like that. This has been really fun. And really enjoyed it's amazing how you can speak for an hour and not really talk about an awful lot, but at the same time, feel like you talked about so many things.
Really? Yes. It's been really great having you as my guest, Steve. Thank you.
I've enjoyed it a lot. Thanks so much for the invite, Lucinda.
Before I go, I'd like to give a big shout out to Podmatch, which I call a dating service for podcasters. Since I joined their platform, I have met so many wonderful people from all over the world, and they make the matches so easy that if you are a podcaster or you have a message that you want to share, you might want to consider checking them out. The affiliate link is at the bottom of my show notes on my website at Sage-Woman Chronicles at sagewoman.life. Part of what I love about them is that they promote civil conversations, and can't we use that right now? So if you check them out, tell them Lucinda sent you. I'd also like to invite you to my Patreon community, where we will have chats with authors or creators. We'll have member chats about the stories that they love, and occasionally we'll have extra episodes or uncut episodes of Story Power. So please go check out my Patreon page at patreon.com/storypower without the hyphen, all one word. I hope you enjoyed the show. If you like what you heard, please share it with a friend and give us a review on your favorite podcast app. It will help people find us. You'll find the show notes for this episode at my website, Sage Woman Chronicles, at sagewoman.life. You can leave a comment there. And remember, as Philip Pullman said, after nourishment, shelter, and companionship, stories are the thing we need most in the world. Until next time, this is Lucinda Sage-Midgorden. Thanks for listening.